Hello and welcome to Marion Jamet, the Head of Policy and Advocacy at the Irish Green Building Council. Thank you, Marion, for your time today.
Hi, Lisa. Thank you for having me.
So the Irish Green Building Council was founded in 2011 as part of the global network of the World Green Building Council, and it plays a pivotal role in essential resources, sustainability, education and tools for Ireland's built environment. And one such area is retrofit and upgrading the energy efficiency of Ireland's buildings. And one of the things people may say is that we're going through a retrofit revolution right now, and we can definitely see that in domestic retrofit, however, not so much in commercial. Do you think, Marion, is there any particular reason why commercial buildings are slower on the uptake than their domestic counterparts?
I think you're absolutely right, Lisa. I mean, we hear far more about domestic retrofit. Even ourselves as Irish Green Building Council, when we do organize, workshop on energy renovation, like people natural tendencies to talk about residential retrofit. I suppose in a way it kind of capture people's imagination more, and it's easier to connect with the domestic retrofit. Furthermore, I suppose if you look at the numbers, if you just look in terms of buildings, and I'm not talking about energy use, but we have in terms of the stock, I mean, it's 1.5 million homes that needs to be decarbonized by 2050. It's about 110,000 commercial buildings. So I suppose that probably partly explains why we tend to hear far more, I suppose, about domestic retrofit as opposed to commercial retrofit. Also, perhaps commercial retrofit is slightly more complicated. By that, I mean, we have a huge diversity of building in the commercial sector. I mean, being in terms of the use of the building, from an office to a factory, or in terms of the energy use, and also I think in terms of ownership, because we have far more tenants in commercial building, I suppose, in Ireland than in the residential sector. Not even to mention when you have a building when you would have that is partly used for that has part commercial use, part residential use. So in a way, it's probably more complicated as well in the commercial sector.
And that could be described as just one of the challenges of commercial retrofit is the variation on the different types of buildings as well. What other challenges would you say companies face when they're looking at retrofitting their commercial property?
I think you're absolutely right. I suppose the diversity is a challenge. You can't really apply a one-size-fits-all approach, I suppose, to energy renovation in the commercial sector. One really challenge that we can see in the commercial sector as opposed to residential is that perhaps it's not perceived as a priority, at least by some companies, because you have so many competing priorities as well. If you're running a business, especially a smaller type of business, and you can see that from research from SCAI, from the Department of Climate Action, but perhaps that's also linked to the way ourselves, like in the construction industry or in the energy industry, we have been talking about commercial retrofit, just talking about it not only, but mainly in terms of energy savings, whereas there's far more to that than just, energy saving, like in terms of comfort, of health and well-being and other benefits, things that may as well influence, I suppose, a business decision to retrofit, which might not be exclusively energy saving. Also, I suppose deep retrofit may be perceived as slightly disruptive, I suppose, to a business. If you actually have your employees in the building. I mean, strangely enough, in a way, I suppose it would have been easier in the last year, with the COVID restriction to retrofit this building, although obviously we couldn't do it for different reasons. But I think that's another challenge. Also, sometimes I suppose finance, or at least the existing finance mechanism, may be perceived as complex. And another thing, as I've said, I think is because lots of business may not own the premises. There are split incentive issue between the owners and the tenant. The tenant may want to do it, but may not have the capacity to do it. So there are kind of a lot of issues, I suppose, there to take into account.
Yeah. And one of the main challenges we see a lot of the time is
Mhm.
people don't understand that there are a lot of supports available to them. So one, for example, will be the SAI Better Energy Communities Grant, which offers public and private companies up to 30% grant off energy efficiency measures, as well as there's programs such as Exceed. Do you know of any other supports that are available for commercial buildings?
Um, I mean, that wouldn't really be my area of expertise, but I do agree with you. There are like support available for businesses. I mean, especially like through SEAI. Also, more than there are also, like, I suppose, technical support, like, I think the SEAI Energy Academy is very good in terms of how much you can learn, in terms of what can be done and how it can be done. Perhaps there is a perception sometimes among businesses that some other finance mechanism, and I'm not specifically speaking about SEAI grants, maybe too complicated to use, I suppose, if you want to retrofit your buildings. There are also some tax incentives that can be used, but there could be more. And again, like, I think if we go back to the diversity of the commercial sector, I think technical support will be quite important as well. If you talk for smaller companies or smaller businesses, in a way, they are kind of similar, I suppose, to homeowners in terms of the difficulty for finance, but also in terms of knowing what to do. So I think it's a complicated area, but you're absolutely right. There is support available from SEAI.
And there are a lot of support as well from the Irish Green Building Council. So everybody should check out igbc.ie as well. And when we think about the word support, what comes to my mind is who supports the environment, because Ireland has the second highest greenhouse gas emissions in Europe right now. So upgrading our commercial buildings will have a huge impact on our current position. And that's one of the main areas that we can upgrade in and to try lower our greenhouse gas emissions. And what do you feel will be the big impact if our more commercial buildings do take this retrofit on?
Yeah, I mean, again, like, you are right in terms of the environmental impact, I suppose, of the building stock in general, but more specifically what we are discussing today are commercial buildings. I think it based on the calculation that we have done in the IGBC, like the built environment will be responsible for about a fifth of our emission. And by that, I mean like heating and cooling, but I also mean like embodied emissions. So obviously, by retrofitting this property, we could significantly, we could have a significant impact on our emission being embodied or operational energy type of emissions. And also, I mean, there's very good studies from SEAI on the commercial building stock that do show that a significant part of our commercial buildings are energy inefficient, and really that small upgrade could really significantly reduce, I suppose, the CO2 emissions. So the potential in the commercial building is definitely there, being by small measures or kind of deeper measure. And also, sorry, I'm just thinking the current rate of energy renovation in the commercial building is relatively low. I think it's about 4% per annum, but even that, most of that is really like shallow measure. Like if you look at deep retrofit, I think it's 0.1% of the stock. So, I mean, that just goes to show, like the potential impact, like if we were really increasing the level of renovation.
And as you had mentioned before regarding the additional benefits, so other than financial and energy savings, it's also the employee health and well-being is a huge aspect. So it's the ventilation, the healthy indoor air quality, the comfortable room temperature, the reductions in emissions, as well as pollution, noise pollution, light pollution. And over 70% of companies in Ireland state that they are committed to the environment and their staff and the corporate social responsibility. So how do you feel that this particular area will benefit more companies wanting to retrofit as well?
Yeah, I think that's something well, probably more research is needed in that area, but that's something we haven't communicated well enough, like by the, I mean, construction industry or energy industry in general, because if you look at when people take the decision to retrofit, it's very rare that they only take that decision, I suppose, based purely on, on energy savings or energy cost. And in fact, like lots of research that has been conducted by the World Green Building Councils or umbrella organization shows that there are many co-benefits associated with energy renovation in the commercial sector in terms of lots of research in that area, in terms of employee productivity, but also decrease in absenteeism if you have like better comfort, better control of temperature, daylight. And I think really, if you look at the cost, I think in one of the papers from the World Green Building Council, in office buildings, I think like most office based business, sorry, like 90% of the cost will be associated, to staff costs. So in terms of, by just improving the productivity by 1 or 2%, I mean, it could have a significant impact there. But I think that's really one thing I would like to see more research on, specifically in Ireland, like get better data on these co-benefits so that we can support that, these messaging and messages as well, and communication around that.
And I think that's especially important now as we have the hybrid return to the offices. Exactly. And with COVID still in the air. So we need to be careful and watch our employees. And just to the Climate Action Plan of 2019 with our goals for 2030 and 2050, there are specific goals for the domestic market. Are there any for commercial?
So commercial sector is mentioned in the Climate Action Plan, not I suppose to the same extent, but you would have also, if you look at Ireland long-term renovation strategy, I suppose, which was published in 2020, you do have target for the commercial sector, like really making clear that about 1/3 of all the commercial buildings must be retrofitted by 2030 to a B or a B level, and then really similar target for like basically 1/3 to be retrofitted by 2030, another third by 2040, and the last third by 2050, so that actually we can reach carbon neutrality by 2050. So from that point of view, if you look at where we were, in fairness, 4 or 5 years ago, we were constantly calling as IGBC for clear targets. So I suppose, it's moving in the right direction. And what I mean by that is, I think the targets are really important in terms of providing certainty to, to the industry that we are serious about retrofitting our building stock, and to people as well, and that it's worth investing in energy renovation for the future, in upskilling your staff and so on. So, I mean, I know we don't see as much, I suppose, in the media about commercial retrofit, but at least we start to see, some sort of target, and it's encouraging from that point of view.
And when we speak about targets as well, I think we all know that Ireland's going through a huge construction boom, especially within housing. And thanks to current building regulations and standards such as LEED and BREEAM, we're now building more low energy, sustainable commercial properties as well as domestic. Do you think we should have a more of a regulatory approach for retrofit standards for commercial, and encouraging, the same encouragement that goes to new construction should be going to retrofit as well?
I think every businesses are different. So in terms of their motivation, some companies would be interested in retrofitted anyway for various reasons. But I think in terms of from a legal point of view, I think there's a few things that could be looked at. I think the NZ standard for commercial buildings is not as ambitious as it is for residential. I mean, for instance, we still have a lot of air conditioning going in commercial buildings that may not be fully justified based on our climate. Again, like that's the kind of thing that we would like to see addressed, but also I mean, for instance, at European levels, there are lots of talks about minimum energy performance standards. And I know you may know as well that, it's something that has been introduced in the UK or in other countries such as the Netherlands or France. And I'm not saying there are silver bullet, but what we do see, like, for instance, in the Netherlands, where you do have legislation there that states that by 2023, sorry, you will no longer be able to, I suppose, to rent out a commercial property that has a B or, well, an energy performance certificate lower than D. I mean, the B or rating are different across Europe, but by having that target, what we can see talking with our Dutch colleague, it means like, like banks no longer really want to invest, at a property that doesn't reach that specific target, or at least if they see that you don't have a plan, I suppose, to retrofit. So, you can see that this type of measure, let's say minimum energy performance standard, could have an impact in terms of retrofit. Saying that, I mean, we are absolutely clear that if you introduce such a legislation, you need to have, like, technical and financial support. It's not about, making life difficult for everyone. It has to come, it has to be flagged well in advance, and it has to come with, financial and technical support. Other things that could be looked at, I suppose, are things such as green leases. So whereby, in your lease, if you're renting, like, there is like a commitment, I suppose, from the tenant and the owner to work together to improve the environmental performance of the building. Now, generally speaking, it does lead to kind of shallow type of retrofits or shallow measure, but I think it's good to start the conversation, because it allows both parties to talk about energy, to talk about water, about waste. And by just starting that conversation, I think you raise awareness. And also, it seems to be clear from research from SCAI, again, that, when someone do even a shallow retrofit, they are more than likely, to go toward the next step further down the line. So I think that's quite important. And my last point, I'm sorry, I'm quite long on that question. I think one thing we really would like to see is really to start moving towards wildlife carbon assessment in the commerce, I mean, across the board in the built environment, but I think it's highly relevant in the commercial sector, because just also to avoid, like, a high level of demolition and then construction, because in terms of carbon, like, really, if we are serious about our carbon targets, there's a lot of embodied energy in the construction material of this building being demolished. So by that, retrofitting this building would means reducing, I suppose, embodied emission and reducing the emission associated with operational energy. No, it might not be the case for buildings, but generally speaking, it should be the case. So that's why we would like to see more life cycle assessment. But I think, again, that's a strong, I think that's a strong case for more energy renovation.
And I think the great thing is now we're moving towards more commercial retrofits, and we're slowly progressing. And I think with help from the amazing SEAI, the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, their support and grant funding, as well as their technical support, and you guys at the IGBC providing endless education and resources, that I do feel like we are moving towards our goals. And when we give the benefits, of the whole point of the Core Retrofit campaign is to show awareness and promote the benefits, not just financial, but energy saving, and the benefits for your employees' well-being and for the environment as well. So you're future proofing, and we're helping build a better tomorrow for the next generation as well.
Yeah, totally. I think the future proofing part is very important, actually, that you have just mentioned. Definitely. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Marion.
Oh, thanks to you, Lisa. I mean, it was a very interesting conversation.